But they didn't mention that he's also Leroy Lindsay, OD, for aviation. Chairman of the JCA, Mr. Philip Enriquez, Mrs. Alreen Richards-Barr from the Atlanta International Airport, both here in the capacity as a panelist and a very well-known patriarch of, or matriarch, I should say, of the Jamaica aviation system, representing us at all times in Atlanta and being instrumental in the sister airport and sister city organization that we now enjoy with Atlanta. Dr. Janine Dawkins, who is here representing the minister at this point in time, and we welcome you, Doc. Air Hotel Chairman, Mr. Mark Ramsey, the CEO of MBJ, Dr. Raphael Echivani, Ms. Tanya Bedward, who is also representing the MTM and the PS for the main presentation today, Mr. Chris Reed, who is a fellow panelist with us today for this very important event, the board members of the AAJ, JCAA, and Air Hotel, and last but definitely not the least, the big support today from our aviation practitioners, stakeholders, and of course, guests. Welcome to this very crucial function today. And so on behalf of the airports authorities, it's my very distinct pleasure to bring greetings as a major stakeholder, sponsor of this event, to mark our recognition of World Aviation Day 2017. As Government of Jamaica designated airport owner operator, this multifaceted and exciting aviation industry, the AAJ's remit for this greeting represents all our airports. That is, the Norman Manley International in Kingston, Sangster International in Montego Bay, the Ian Fleming International Airport in Boscobel, and our 3 domestic aerodromes, Stinson Pen, Ken Jones, and Negril. This greeting also represents all the many stakeholders, the airlines, speaker, customs, security, concessionaires, and many more, whose functions at the airports delivers one seamless service to our passengers and other users of our airports. Jamaica's aviation industry, ladies and gentlemen, is closely linked to world aviation history. And hence, when world aviation recorded its birth in 1903, Jamaica recorded its aviation birth in 1911, a mere 8 years thereafter. So when world aviation was celebrated 100 years in 2003, Jamaica did so in 2011. An indication of how closely Jamaica has kept pace with the world in its aviation development. Civil aviation emerged from the remnants of World War I, hence the formation of the International Air Transportation Association in 1919, to ensure cooperation between air transport operators. Subsequently, in 1944, the International Civil Aviation Organization was formed as the governing body for civil aviation. The Airports Council International was also later established in 1991 to represent airports and airports' interests. These 3 major bodies, which currently resides in Montreal, Canada, represents the seat of world civil aviation governance and administration. Similar to the rest of the world, civil aviation has been the Jamaica's most catalytic economic growth driver, with tourism being at the center in a symbiotic relationship. Hence, any reference to contribution of tourism to the GDP of the world economies, and by extension Jamaica's economy, must of necessity recognize the contribution of civil aviation. In 1962, Jamaica's international air traffic was the amount of a grand sum of 512,000 passengers, shared almost evenly between SIA and NMIA. Tourist traffic then represented approximately 400,000 of this number, or 78%. So you see, it's from those beginnings that tourism has been our mainstay. Jamaica's current numbers in 2016 traffic is 5.6 million passengers, of which approximately 80% or 4.4 million, that is 2.2 million stopover visitors, represents airport statistics. Of the total national airport traffic of 5.6 million passengers, the Sangster International Airport handles 4 million, or 71%, while the Norman Manley today handles 1.6, or 29%. So that's our story today, of which approximately 50% of Norman Manley's traffic is tourism, while approximately 71%, 90% of Sangster's traffic is tourism. I'm making this point, ladies, to explain and to bring across the significant connection between tourism and our aviation industry. It is against this background that the Airports Authority of Jamaica finds it a natural fit to join forces with the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority and the Aerotel as key trustees of Jamaica's civil aviation in putting on this seminar to recognize and celebrate World Aviation Day. It is fitting to recognize a team from the AAJ, JCAA, and Aerotel, and in particular, Mr. Alfred MacDonald of AAJ, all of whom worked overnight to organize this event at short notice. We now look forward to spending the rest of the day with you in what is expected to be a very educational and enlightening seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, President Diedrich, for putting us through a bit of a history lesson there. And one lesson I think would be important for you to know. 25 years after the first aircraft landed here in Jamaica, the first Jamaican license was issued to a pilot. A person who has been training pilots in Jamaica for a long time, Mr. Carl Barnett, his license number is number 2. I bet you wouldn't guess who's his number 1. Mrs. Barnett. I'd like to add here that this function is being streamed live by JIS and on Facebook at JCAA and AAJ. Some other dignitaries came in after we started. Lieutenant Colonel Oscar Darby is here, former Director General of Civil Aviation. Ms. Joy Roberts is here from JAMVAC, new CEO. Welcome. We have Dr. Eric Deans sitting right in front of me here from the Free Zone Authority, Special Economic Zone Authority. The name's changed after Deans, but this is your... And we also have former president of the AAJ, Mr. Earl Richards, who is also here. So, Mr. Armstrong, we're not going to leave you out. As the head of Aerotel, I would like to ask you to come to the podium and give a few remarks. Please welcome Mr. Armstrong for me, please.
Good morning, all. With all previous protocols having been observed and all guests comprehensively welcomed, I won't take you through that long list again. I will simply add my word of welcome and gratitude for your supporting this very important event. A couple of comments that you might find instructive. The aviation industry, and in particular the number of flights that occur across the world, have over the last 30 years been increasing at the rate of doubling every 15 years. 100% growth on average in aviation traffic every 15 years. And another fact that I would like you to bear in mind is that the average value of the contribution of an aviation job to GDP, taken as a standard across the global economy, is 3 times that of the average job. The typical aviation job contributes 3 times the national average to GDP. Now, these might sound like reasons to boast, but in fact, I think they are very sobering facts that cause us to look very carefully at our industry, to consider it very seriously, and to ensure that we make the right decisions to take the industry forward. And so I'm particularly pleased to see so many here this morning, so many coming out to consider with us where we have been, where we are going, and to contribute your own critical thinking to the process as we go forward. In my particular sphere as head of Aerotel, we are responsible for supporting the dizzying array of technology that underpins and supports the industry. And I would suggest that as I have traversed the industry over the last several years, I've come to realize that there are 3 main objectives, 3 particularly key objectives for aviation. They are safety, safety, and safety. And so the technology that supports and underpins all of this safety is very important. It must be very carefully managed. The custodians of it must be particularly circumspect and ensure that the industry is kept safe. I have had a long career, over 20 years in the technology industry, and notwithstanding that, coming to Aerotel and working with the Airports Authority and the JCA, I have been overwhelmed by the extent of an array of technology that exists and how it is all put together and how it supports the industry. I actually came into Aerotel with a low haircut, but with some hair. And my challenges since then have taken me to where you see me today. But it is exciting, it is great fun, it is sober and important and critical work. And together, we're going to ensure that the industry is safe as we go forward to supporting Jamaica and the global economic development imperatives. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day's proceedings. Please do give us the benefit of your critical thinking. Let us leave here better and more knowledgeable than we came. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Can you imagine an industry that grows by 100% each year? Every 15 years? Well, in the next 15, 17 years, for example, there's going to be a need for something like 430,000 pilots to fly airplanes around the world. At the moment, there are about 25,000 commercial carriers, airplanes operating, and by 2035, there should be something in the range of 40,000 aircraft flying the skies around us. So there is room for growth. There is room in the industry for people who want to come in and make a profession of it. At this juncture, I would like to ask Dr. Janine Dawkins to come to the podium. Dr. Dawkins is the Chief Technical Director in the Ministry of Transport and Mining, and this morning she is here representing the Honorable Minister of Transport and Mining. Give Dr. Dawkins a hand, please.
Good morning, everyone. I would love to be able to skip the salutations, but seeing that I'm representing the minister, I will go through the whole process. And before I start, I want you to use your imaginations. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to transform into the minister. Okay? Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Chairman Henriquez, Chairman Ramsey, board members and directors of the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, the Airports Authority of Jamaica, and Aerotel, Mr. Audley Diedrich, CEO of NMIA Airports Limited, Dr. Raphael Echevarne, CEO of MBJ Airports Limited, the management and staff of all of these entities, and the Ministry of Transport and Mining, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I take pleasure in bringing greetings to this aviation seminar as a part of the observation of this year's International Civil Aviation Week. I thank the organizers for the opportunity to address this aspect of my portfolio, which I feel very passionate about. A day that marks the successes achieved in the field of civil aviation and the desire for global progress and improvement. This annual celebration marks the general fostering of international connectivity, peace, and prosperity, and is observed under the extended theme, working together to ensure no country is left behind. Our nation's aviation industry constitutes a critical cornerstone of Jamaica's economic development. Jamaica's aviation history began as early as 1911, and Air Jamaica's inaugural flights on Sunday, May 1st, 1966, represented the start of the country's national airline. From the initiation of flight over a century ago, aviation has stretched technological boundaries and has, in equally extreme manner, provided unmatched utility and opportunities for the growth and development of nations worldwide. Through aviation, new worlds and unparalleled possibilities have emerged for Jamaica and other nations, dispersed in varying locations across the globe. With superior force, aviation has brought people, languages, products, ideas, and values together in a way and with a speed that was previously unimaginable. Up to 2015, the world's civil aviation fleets comprised of 27,352 airplanes. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people are flying in airplanes at any moment. Isn't that amazing? Yet, while aviation provides opportunities that appear as limitless as the sky, there are continuous hurdles that our civil aviation sector must continue to overcome under the expert regulation and guidance of the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority. I have no doubt that these hurdles are no match for their determination and dedication. We can only expect that even further strides will be made as we soar to new heights with the possibilities that arise every day through the works of the Airports Authority of Jamaica, the Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority, and the Aeronautical Telecommunications Limited. I take this opportunity to commend these entities for their arduous efforts and commitment to making the Jamaican airspace a global competitor. Your efforts have definitely not gone unnoticed. We have, indeed, made our mark in the skies. The aviation sector will remain the transportation of choice for individuals, businesses, and other entities seeking affordable, time-saving, dependable, efficient, and safe passage for freight and persons, especially over long distances. I anticipate a fruitful and productive session in this aviation seminar and look forward to the outcomes of the discussions that are to be held here today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Dawkins, for representing the minister so well. And for actually bringing out the passion and the vision that the minister shares for aviation. He's one of the most passionate men I know when it comes to dealing with aviation, and he has a vision that surpasses many. At this time, I would like to bring in a little while to the podium our main speaker for this morning's session. The speaker will be Ms. Tanya Bedward, who is the Director of Projects at the Ministry of Transport and Mining, where she has worked for in excess of 13 years. She has tremendous knowledge and experience in transport administration at the central government level, spanning the areas of transport planning, transport policy development, projects development and implementation, government procurement, among others. She is a director on the boards of the Toll Authority of Jamaica, as well as that of the Airports Authority of Jamaica. Ms. Bedward has also been integrally involved on several teams tasked with evaluating the airport systems within Jamaica with a view to developing and streamlining various policies to enhance efficiency, effectiveness, and competitiveness of the island's aviation sector. Ms. Tanya Bedward has also taught at the University of Technology on a part-time basis for a number of years. Now, you've heard of some of the qualities of Ms. Bedward, and she is well qualified to do the work that she has been doing. She's a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies at this time. She has an MSc from the Georgia Institute of Technology in City and Regional Planning. She has an MSc with distinction from the University of the West Indies in Trinidad in Planning and Development. She has a BSc Honors from the University of Technology, Jamaica in Urban and Regional Planning. She was a Fulbright Graduate Scholarship recipient in 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, please help us bring Ms. Bedward to the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Good morning, everyone. I would also like I can use this opportunity, since I'm not representing the minister, to say all protocols observed. First of all, before I start the presentation, I would like to apologize for Dr. Alwyn Hales, who is the permanent secretary within the ministry. He had an emergency and therefore is unable to be with us today. However, I will step in and present on the whole matter of the national transport policy, and in particular as it relates to aviation policy. Now, the presentation that I will make this morning will cover the areas that are indicated on this slide. I will give a general overview of the national transport policy, just to contextualize the aviation sector within transport. As you know, the Ministry of Transport and Mining is a policy ministry, what we refer to as a policy ministry. And this came in light of the the government of Jamaica's modernization program, where you have, which was started in about 2001, where you have ministries focusing on developing policies, whereas the entities falling under the various ministries were the bodies who actually were responsible for implementing the policies. So as such, the National Transport Policy emerged, so I will provide the context of aviation within that policy. We'll look at the underpinning principles for the National Transport Policy, the policy priorities, and in particular, in zooming in the air transport policy aspect, we look at the visions, strategic objectives, policy issues, and related statements. And also, we will highlight, what I'll highlight here is a preliminary evaluation of the policy that was done in 2007. For persons who are familiar with policy development, we know that policies are not etched in stone, and therefore it's an instrument that is to be developed and reviewed ever so often. In the case of the National Transport Policy, that should have been 5 years. The policy has, however, not been reviewed. So the ministry, in taking that step, as you'll see later on, we have undertaken a preliminary evaluation process, and I'll highlight some of the outcomes from this process. And we also seek to engage our stakeholders, and therefore we're engaging in dialogue with the stakeholders with a view to optimizing the policy review process when it actually occurs. Okay, this is not the best slide, but what this shows you essentially is that the ministry, as I pointed out, is a policy ministry, so there are a number of entities that falls under the, does this have a pointer? Number of entities that falls under the ministry, with Aerotel, the AAJ, as well as the NMIA being among them. The National Transport Policy that was developed in 2007 it actually forms a framework for a lot of the activities that are undertaken by these entities. What persons will not realize is that down to the technical officers and the activities that are undertaken by the technical officers, they are guided by these policies, because it is based on these policies that the annual corporate plans, the strategic plans, etc., and even the individual work plans of the various officers are developed. The National Transport Policy of Jamaica, the aim of the policy is to guide the overall development of the transport sector and to provide the framework for development of the environmentally sound transport infrastructure and services in support of sustainable economic and social growth. The 9 principles outlined there are the fundamental principles that underpin the National Transport Strategy. And as our colleagues will have alluded to earlier, that the aviation sector has a responsibility to ensure that Jamaica plays its part in working together and ensuring that no country is left behind. And this is also embedded in the principles that underpin the NTP as outlined there. The policy priorities are many, as you would see highlighted on the slides, and just to indicate that this includes encouraging greater public sector participation. And we would see this over the years, where we see aspects of this policy being implemented, for example, the privatization of the Sangster International and the ongoing process to privatize the Norman Manley International Airport. It also speaks to improving interagency coordination and in intermodal transport, because we know that while we have an effective aviation sector, this can only be boosted by an effective development in other modes of transportation. So, for example, Mr. Dedrick spoke about the role of tourism. But however, when we take the tourists into the airport, we need to be able to transport them to the different locations. And therefore, we need to ensure that our road networks, for example, are adequately developed and that our transportation services that are offered is on par with anywhere in the world. It also speaks to creating policy awareness among the stakeholders, and this consultation is very important in this process, improving the integration of transport policy through planning, appraisal, and implementation across the modes, as well as ensuring that adequate regulations are in place that speaks to the whole matter of safety, security, and environmental protection. And I cannot underscore the importance of this, especially in the aviation sector. So I'm going to zoom in now on the specific policy provisions as it relates, the national transport policy provisions as it relates to the air transport sector. So the vision for Jamaica's air transport sector, as stipulated in the policy, is a competitive, environmentally friendly aviation system that ensures safety in accordance with international standards, meeting current and future demands, and provides low-cost services in a reliable and efficient manner while contributing to the social and economic development of the country. And in order to achieve this vision, the strategic objectives that are outlined in the policy are indicated here, and there are 6 primary strategic objectives. These speak to public-private participation. It also speaks to enhancing safety of our skies. It addresses efficiency and productive aviation, promoting efficiency and productive aviation industry. It speaks to the capacity for enhancing the capacity for international air cargo services, as well as maintaining acceptable standards for safety and environmental protection. There are a number of issues that emerge under each of these strategic objectives, and it is based on the issues that are identified that a number of policy statements have been put forward, and these policy statements are intended to guide the activities of the aviation sector. Under the first policy strategy, the policy objective, we identify the issue as being the need for government to see that the private sector plays a greater role in the expansion of the operations of the island's aerodromes. And to address this issue, there are a number of related activities that the government have committed to undertake, and this includes encouraging participation in the aviation industry by private sector. It also speaks to increasing or seeking concessions for international airports. The policy as well speaks to ensuring private investors have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities, as well as their rights and entitlements within the national context. The second objective, which speaks to enhancing safety in our skies, the 2 fundamental issues that were identified at the time of development of this policy is, first, safety and security of air navigation, surveillance, and traffic control systems are important and therefore should be enhanced. The second issue is that the air navigation system depends heavily on a variety of advanced technologies for communication, navigation, and surveillance, and air traffic management. And we see here a number, the various approaches that the government have put forward to improve or address those issues. And I won't go through all of them, but just to mention, it includes upgrading Jamaica's radar system. It also includes the use of new technologies and through structural changes to the air traffic services. It includes ensuring that the JCAA provides the requisite and up-to-date training, as well as ensuring that the air navigation systems are up to date. The third objective, which speaks to the promotion of efficiency and productive aviation within the industry, the issues that informed this policy at the time was that approximately 60% of the island's 2.2 million visitors use the international airport as a point of entry. In addition, more than 20,000 Jamaicans and visitors annually use the 4 domestic airports. And you would note, I want you to remember that these issues that are being highlighted are the issues that were current as at 2007, and that is when the policy was promulgated. The other issue is that the international airport volumes are increasing, and it is vital to the country's tourism and trade sector that scheduled air transport linkages are established throughout the world to increase the attractiveness of the country as a tourism and trade hub. And these are some of the approaches that the government have put forward to towards addressing those issues. And like transportation in general, we have to remember that in boosting the competitiveness of the sector, remember that people don't travel just for the sake of traveling. There must be a pull to the destination. It could be for business. It could be for recreation, tourism, for example. So therefore, in promoting competitiveness within the industry, there's need for collaboration with other sectors. So therefore, you have under the strategies proposed here, it speaks to collaboration, for example, with customs and immigration towards ensuring that travel is made seamless for visitors, for example. The fourth objective speaks to the facilitation of the development and commercialization of domestic airdromes. And the issues that were significant at the time is that the government manages and operates 4 domestic airdromes, which must be adequate for future growth. It also was identified that in order to improve the efficiency and achieve long-term savings, the government, in consultation with the aviation community, is examining options for commercializing the existing domestic airdromes, as well as the fact that the development of general aviation facilities will be dependent on the market-driven forces and developments in other sectors, and as such as home porting, cruise shipping, as highlighted before. Among some of the activities or actions that were put forward by the government to address towards meeting this objective is promoting private sector participation. And we see the role of the private sector emerging as a prominent strategy towards boosting the aviation sector. It also spoke to seeking to develop the general aviation facilities within Jamaica, and where the need arises through increased traffic, consider converting domestic airdromes into international airports. It also suggested or proposed ensuring that all participants in the domestic air transport market are treated equally and can expect a reasonable return on their investment. The fifth strategy, objective rather, which spoke to the promotion, which spoke to promoting the use of and developing the capacity of international air cargo services. And the issues that emerged at the time was that the international air cargo volumes are increasing, and it is important to ensure that this traffic, which is increasing, which is increasingly important in the global world economy, can be handled at an effective and efficient manner. And especially, this is extremely critical now when we look at what's happening now. This was posited then, but when we look at what's happening now, especially as Jamaica works to position itself as the logistics hub, Dr. Deans is sitting right here, and I'm speaking about his baby. But when you talk about Jamaica positioning itself as the logistics hub, not only within the Caribbean region, but globally, it is important that the transportation of cargo is optimized in order to make the aviation sector more effective. Another issue that was identified at this point was that Jamaica's need to negotiate an all-cargo open skies agreement with the U.S., and it creates new opportunities to strengthen the U.S.-Jamaica economy relations through closer air links in transport and trade. So whereas the transportation of cargo may be predominantly done by marine environment, there are certain cargo that has to be, where time is essential, and the air transport is fundamentally known as the mode of transport that is most efficient and most effective when you factor in time and the importance of needing to transport commodity and people within specific time frames. Highlighted here are a number of recommendations that the government have put forward, or actions towards addressing the issue that are highlighted on the Objective 5, and this includes ensuring that all international airports have adequate capacity to handle international cargo. It also speaks to seeking to improve ground handling services, promoting economic and competitive freight rates, which is very important, and seeking to assist other members of the CARICOM community. And the sixth objective, which is the last objective among those I had highlighted, the issue that was significant at the time, or that informed the development of that emerged under this objective, was the need for Jamaica to boost its very high level of safety within the aviation sector. And of course, we know the importance of this all too well. And my colleagues that preceded me at the podium spoke to the need for ensuring a safe environment within the airspace in particular. And because of the importance of this element, you'll see that there are a number of strategies that have been put forward by the government to ensure that this issue is addressed. And this is also critical because of the international implications that arise as well. So among the activities that are proposed by the government includes enforcing aviation safety policy within the ICAO framework. It also speaks to ensuring that internationally mandated annual and triennial follow-up inspections are conducted and deficiencies are addressed. It speaks to maintaining the highest possible standards for aircraft, passenger, and airport staff throughout the airport's authority regulations based on ICAO requirements. It also speaks to participating through JCAA and AAJ in multilateral investment fund projects to strengthen airport security, and this includes ongoing training. And one of the fundamental reasons for the need for ongoing training is because of the evolution of technology as it relates to this aspect of the sector. The promotion of cooperation in safety oversight within CARICOM is also very important, and the role that Jamaica plays in the regional aviation safety oversight system is it is of ongoing importance for Jamaica. It speaks to or recommends the promotion of safety awareness by facilitating the effective safety awareness by promoting safety awareness by facilitating the effectiveness sharing of the aviation safety data and information. And we know we can't plan without adequate safety data and information. And providing data and information as it relates to safety in aviation, real time is critical. So therefore, the technology must be in place to support this very important activity. It speaks to managing the impact of aviation activities on the environment by promoting sustainable management of natural and physical resources. We know that the aviation sector is one of the primary users of fuel, and therefore it is critical that as our industry grows within a global context, that we're also on board in ensuring that our contribution to the use of fuel is optimized and that it is done within the most sustainable manner. Again, we see the impact on the environment, and if we're a significant user of fuel, then that means that we could also have a significant impact on the environment as it relates to pollution, and in particular air pollution. And we know that the sector also has implications for noise pollution. So taking steps to reduce those impacts, as well as ensuring that environmental impact assessments are carried out for all major aviation-related projects, and encouraging investment in air transport technology and infrastructure that are aimed at improving environmental performance. And this includes even general energy conservation, for example. And finally, as it relates to the government's actions proposed in order to achieve this objective, is the need to maintain its international environmental program through continued involvement with the Airports Council, the International World Environment Standing Committee. And under this, the obligations are highlighted there, establishing energy consumption targets, implementing the environmental management systems, putting in place environmental action plan, and also putting in place an environmental stewardship program for the sector. As I pointed out there, we have the ministry, or the government of Jamaica has developed this national transport policy since 2007. And since that time, there has not been a review of the policy. There was a timeline of 5 years highlighted for the policy to be reviewed, but we know how things happen. There's a call on resources and there are priorities placed on other areas. So therefore, the policy has gone unreviewed for a number of years. The ministry is now in the process because we recognize the importance of the fact that the policy exists within a dynamic environment. There are so many things changing as it relates to the environment, as it relates to technology, etc. And therefore, it is critical that we take the initiative to review the transport policy and make it keep it in line, bringing it in line with what is current. And in doing this, the ministry undertook a preliminary evaluation exercise just to get an idea, a general idea of the extent to which the policy that was developed in 2007 has been implemented or was implemented as at 2015. And what you see here is the overall indication of this preliminary assessment is that 71% of the policy strategic objectives were achieved, whereas 29% still remains outstanding. And this is based, as I indicated, on a preliminary process, because in doing the actual review, it will require more in-depth work. And this work will also include consultations with stakeholders, with many of you sitting in the room, as we seek to improve the policy development process. And we see, in particular, for the air transport sector, where 76%, the evaluation revealed that the objectives were achieved up to 76%. Some of the gaps, we have also highlighted just a few of the gaps that we have identified that emerged from the preliminary process, and this includes the need for continued PPP initiatives. We've seen where that have started, but additional work is required. We're also seeing where there are a lot of projects projects are being undertaken, for example, by JCAA, AAJ, as well as Airtel, which are geared at meeting the objectives of the policy. For example, the procurement of the instrument landing system and distant measurement equipment at Sangster, just to name one. There are continued efforts to increase the number of air services agreements, for example, with various countries. And we know that Open Skies, Ministers is very, very passionate about, getting as many Open Skies agreements signed as possible. And this is one of the drivers that the ministry is guided by. So indicated here are also other gaps, and I will not go through the full gamut. And if you need a copy of the presentation, I can make it available so that you can also get an idea of the details that have been provided. And we see the additional gaps that are pointed out there. Importantly, as stated earlier, we have identified the need, or we have always acknowledged the need to involve our stakeholders. And the need was even made more pointed in a recent dialogue that we had as a part of a meeting that was held. Why is it going down? Okay, I'll just speak from. Okay. Right, a part of a meeting that was held with the Special Airdromes Committee, and this meeting was held in November, and this had stakeholders who, are investors in various aspects of airdrome activities, and it was a very informative session. The feedback there was very good feedback in terms, and it also highlighted the need to the ministry that in reviewing the policy, it's important that these voices are at the forefront of the process. There were a number of concerns raised in terms of, the adequacy and the currency of our policy as it exists. There were a number of issues put forward, and what jumped out was one comment made by one of the investors at one of our airdromes, and he pointed out that a mile of highway leads to nowhere, but a mile of runway leads to everywhere. And that was, in my mind, a very, very, very poignant phrase, because I know a mile of highway could lead to somewhere, depending on where you are. But essentially, a mile of runway could lead to many places. And it therefore indicates the importance of investing adequately in developing our airdromes. So you will hear from the ministry as time goes by what your role will be in the process as we seek to review the national transport policy. And going forward, the ministry has in place an internal review working group, and it is out of that working group that the preliminary assessment of the policy was undertaken. And the ministry has in its plans for the upcoming 2018-19 financial year to undertake, or at least to commence the review process for the national transport policy, and under which the aviation sector will be considered. And there will, as a part of a requirement of our policy, the government of Jamaica's policy development process, there must be broad brush, a wide cross-section of stakeholder consultation. So as I stated, you will be hearing from the ministry, you will be invited to be a part of this process. And that basically sums up my presentation on providing the policy context from the ministry for the aviation sector. Thank you. I should stand for questions. I see questions and answers here, so I think I should stand. Yes. All presentation. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Now you can see that from the all-encompassing policy, you can see that the industry doesn't operate in a vacuum. There are guiding principles that governs our action. The ministry watches us to ensure that we operate to policy and that we implement the strategies and policies that they have put in place. You know, for example, Ms. Bedford spoke about the environment in the air traffic control operations and civil aviation in general. Civil aviation did an action plan from which will come a photovoltaic implementation at both Norman Manley and Sangster airports. The aircraft coming into Kingston and Montego Bay, they don't do step-down approaches anymore. They do continuous descent operation, arrivals, and continuous climb out, which saves fuel. So we are taking what the ministry says and putting the policies in place, working with them, both at the airports and in the Civil Aviation Authority. So as Ms. Bedford said, there's time for questions. Ask her about the policies and about what Mr. William Singh, Mr. Armstrong, and President Dedrick had to say in their remarks. So if there are any questions, we'll give 15 minutes for that. Any questions? Dr. Deans.
There's a mic right in the center. We can take it around.
Here.
Thank you very much. This question is for Ms. Bedford, and it relates to the policy review which is currently underway. I take note that the policy was enacted in 2007, and you're taking the steps to do a review. But my question is, to what extent is the review taking into account what is happening in the regional or global environment, and to ensure that any new policy or any modifications to the policy take into account what is happening on a regional sphere.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Deans. As I stated, we at the ministry are at the very early stages preparing for the policy review. So therefore, once we get to that stage where the review will be done through a consultancy, for example. So once we get to that stage where the review process is being done, the terms of reference will ensure that all the changes that are happening locally and regionally and globally will be factored into that review process, because we have to make our policy, develop our policy in such a way that we make our sector as competitive as possible and make it be on par with any other country within the world. That's your question.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question to Ms. Bedward.
Okay.
Implementations for safety in our skies. This is something for the future. Or is there any implementation for the safety when it regards to drones? Because I've been seeing a lot now in the skies. 5 years from now, Lord knows how much is going to be in the skies.
Right.
A lot of helicopters flying around as well.
Yes. That, of course, is, we spoke about the change, the dynamic environment within which the policy exists. In 2007, we wouldn't have had this issue with drone. But in doing the review, these are some of the new issues that we have to contend with. And in consultation with the relevant stakeholders, we will ensure that matters such as those are factored into the new policy to be developed, or the revised policy. So, for example, our 3 entities represented here will be key to the revision of the aviation aspects of the national transport policy, because that is where the expertise lie in terms of the technical areas. So drones, the whole matter of drones, we're seeing firsthand, from where we sit in the transport ministry, where there are issues that could be presented for safety, and therefore these are issues that we'd have to consider in reviewing the policy. Thank you.
Excuse me, ma'am. We know the minister's favorite project is the cargo hub in Vernon Field. But last week I read with some alarm a report that the government of Panama has signed with the government of China a $10 billion, I'll say that again, a $10 billion contract to build an aviation cargo hub in Panama. How will this affect the going forward of our project here in Jamaica?
I don't know if that's a policy question, essentially.
We have to have a policy.
Yeah, I know there is a policy direction in terms of building or transport hubs, as mentioned earlier, and this is also within the context of what's happening with the global logistics initiative and the development of special economic zones. Vernon Field has been earmarked as a potential area for the development of I say potential because it's a process that's ongoing.
I understand
for
that,
the
but
development.
Because it's 500 miles, only 500 miles from us, it must have a major impact on how we're going to go forward.
And that is something that we'll have to consider even from an operational perspective, more so than just the policy.
Mic over here. Good morning. My question is, how is it are we going to promote use of the airspace in a business manner. Probably it's not a policy question, but we are struggling with the aerodromes right now, and you want the private sector to be a part of it. How are we advertising? How are we enticing them to take up that role? And I know there's also a focus on landing traffic, but do we consider overflights? How do we advertise to the global space that, hey, Jamaica is in a key position. It's a straight line through basically to North America, South America, Central, wherever. What are we doing to encapture that?
Right. You are correct in terms of it not being a straight policy question, but there's also a policy component that has to be considered. If marketing must be a fundamental aspect of how our airports and our aerodromes operate, but certainly in terms of making Jamaica attractive from the perspective of various industries, so that we provide a reason for traffic to come into the island. So from a policy perspective, those are areas that we would seek to include in revising the policy. What's happening within the tourism sector, for example, what's happening with agriculture, what's happening within our medical sector, our health sector. So certainly from the policy perspective, that would be critical. But I don't know if Mr. Diedrich would want to speak to the whole aspect of marketing or airspace, or Mr. MacDonald.
Good morning again. What I'm actually saying to the DG is that when it comes to airspace matters and who can distribute it, it rests with the JCA, right? But in terms of Jamaica as an attractive destination for aviation growth, as I explained in my presentation, we have rested basically on the back of tourism. And to the extent that Jamaica is one of the more attractive and well-established tourism destination in the region, if not the world, then we have that foundation to build on. However, we shouldn't take it for granted that we should build on one plank. And so I would want to suggest that, as was just mentioned, that we need to piggyback with the plans of the government, with its plans for Jamaica being a logistics hub center, that we develop the aviation product as part of that as well. And more importantly, that aviation has a third plank. Apart from cargo and passenger, you do have a vibrant and thriving general aviation, pleasure aviation sector that we need to start to target. So these are the directions that we're looking to pursue. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dietrich. There's a gentleman at the back that has been trying to say something for a while.
I have a question over here. I'm sorry, since I already have the mic. It was mentioned that there are plans to commercialize the domestic aerodromes, but I wanted to ask, since we know that there will be growth in the industry and the need for more pilots and more aviation professionals, right now we only have Tinsipen Aerodrome as a training ground. What about converting the domestic aerodromes into additional training grounds? Because right now, if you live in Montego Bay, you have to come to Kingston for school.
Right. So
is there any plan to do something like that in that regard?
Well, Mr. Dietrich.
The answer shortly is yes. That so far Tinsipen has been the more or less focal point for aviation training. And as part of current discussions at the level of government and cabinet, there are plans afoot to actually transform Tinsipen in more as logistics support center for back-of-port activities for what takes place on the wharves. That therefore means that in the medium to long term, Tinsipen as we see it today as an aviation center will be diminished or totally taken out. What that means is that other airports will have to be the focal point for placing these types of operations. Currently, we do have aviation training facility at Ian Fleming as well, but the current discussion is centered around reactivating aviation activities at Vernon Field. And part of the central focus of that objective is to take aviation training in that wide, beautiful, open space. Thank you.
Yes, good morning, Ms. Bedward.
Good morning.
One quick question here. David Frey from Aerotel.
Good morning, Mr. Frey.
Is there the consideration from the government in terms of the policies for public-private partnerships for the air navigation services? We spoke about the aerodomes, but for the air navigation services, which there's always an evolution with technology and how fast it is going, and the burden that it could have on taxpayers. Is there any consideration for public-private partnership in that area?
Mr. Gray, right?
Frey.
Mr. Frey. Mr. Frey from Aerotel. You see, I mentioned earlier the consultation process that the review will entail. Persons like you will be a part of it. So, I mean, looking at what is happening now, we would certainly need to consider, for example, you mentioned privatization beyond just the facilities, but also looking at the equipment, the provision of equipment, for example. And that is something that the ministry would also be considering. Thank you. I'll take one more question.
Thank you. Earl Richards.
Morning, Mr. Richards.
There's been a trend in recent years, maybe over the past 10 years or so, where charges on airfares have increased to a level where we could become uncompetitive. In other words, the percentage of taxes on airfares, or rather the percentage of airfares that are taxes has increased tremendously. And this is because a number of agencies that are not really core aviation agencies have, the government has given them the opportunity to get a percentage of, an increment rather, on airfares. And this is the area, airfares is the area that airports, Civil Aviation Authority, the core agencies get their incremental increases over the years. So it may not be a matter of a policy for the ministry as such, but certainly it should be in the review of policy. Right. Government should be made aware that we are running into some, turbulent waters. For short trips to Cayman and even Miami, you find that the percentage of taxes in airfares are really, really high. For long-haul flights, it's not so bad. But it's something that the government should be aware of because it could make us uncompetitive.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Thank you for the questions. I believe that is it for me. And thank you for giving me a listening ear.
Thank you all for the questions. And there are two questions that were asked, which I believe we can cover in the panel discussion. The Director General would like to answer to them now. Actually, it's to do with the overflight, the airspace, and the other to do with drones.
Thank you, Leroy. So the question about making our airspace more attractive. So we know where we sit. Our FIR is the most expeditious route, as you said, going north-south. So what we need to do, and as you're well aware, upgrading our systems for the provision of air navigation services. So we can certainly be more efficient and increase our reliability of providing the service. I think once we do that, we can demonstrate. I mean, we continue to demonstrate that we operate in a very safe environment, and I mean, safety is optimum. But once we can certainly increase the efficiency of our airspace, we will see the improvements there, as well as to look at our fee structure. Right now, our fee structure basically looks at just 2 levels of fees, and we're talking about overflight fees here. So we can look at that as well as some of our competitors have, which is a tiered approach to the fee structures. On the question about the drones, just to advise that it is something that we have been looking at for quite some time, and in fact, there is a flight safety notification that is out. Coming up to the festive season, we know that persons will be buying a lot of presents, and quite a bit of those will be those toys for kids, so we will ramp up our public education program again about the safe use of the drones, the no-fly zones. But we actually have drafted civil aviation regulations that are going through the review process now that will be promulgated in terms of the use. What we want to do, we won't be able to regulate every UAV, every drone, down to the hobbyist. What we want to do, though, is to get the information out there that there is the safe use of these toys, as many of them are that we see. I will let you know that we do have a process for certification for the use of drones in commercial activities. And there are companies that come to us on a regular basis that we do put in place the necessary requirements that they meet for the commercial use of drones in their activities.
Well, my thanks to all the participants this morning and for the audience in the questions that's been asked. We're now going to have a break. The break will be for, the boss says 10 minutes. Back at 11 o'clock, after which we will be having a panel discussion, which will be chaired by the chairman of Aerotel, Mr. Mark Ramsey. Thank you very much. And the break is outside, and you get a few little things to nibble on.